Hello, everyone. I'm Max Goldini, and I'm the colourist who did the grade 4 City is Ours. So I'm just going to walk you through basically what we did for Series 1. So the brief for Series 1, it follows kind of Michael Cavanagh's life, and effectively there was two elements. One was his love life, and the other was this underworld which he spends most of his time in. So we wanted to create two different looks that kind of represented both of those elements. One was kind of warmer, and one had a more gritty feel. And that was an important brief from the very, very beginning. Another important element was we had all these heightened moments through every episode, and we wanted to make sure we pushed all of those, and we could build all these kind of big moments within the series. Another massive brief that came from the execs is they wanted to champion Liverpool, and they wanted Liverpool to feel like this big dynamic city that felt rich and felt like it could house all of these different worlds and different things that are going on at the same time. And that then led through to each of the characters. We wanted that same kind of feel to go through. So when we see Elaine, she always feels more put together. Everything feels in more control, whereas when we see Michael with his gang, it's a little bit more loose and a little bit more rough and ready. And that was always intentional. It was always intentional that we would have this juxtaposition between the two worlds in which he's trying to skirt. We also had a few environments where we knew we had these tense moments, and we wanted to kind of lean into them a little bit. The big thing for us was trying to implement this love story. So for this, we pushed away from that gritty feel and kind of made it warmer. Diane's meant to be the love of his life. It's the only good thing, so that's why we went that way. In terms of, it's still a crime series, so for a large part of it, we still moved towards all these kind of gritty feels and kind of lent into it. And actually, we were given a lot of leeway to kind of make things dark and make things gritty and kind of push things probably further than we normally would. These kind of areas here, these are kind of sections where the brief really was, we didn't want to go too far. There needed to be bridging moments where we could bridge all of the areas that were kind of heightened with all of these kind of more high key moments we had. When we started looking how we were going to build the look for this, we started off with the technical workflow. So for us, the first thing was our... Is it playing? So when we started building the look, the first thing we did was started with the color workflow. So for us, we knew we were going to be shooting on the Sony Venice, and we knew that we had to deliver a Rec 709 version, and we also had to deliver HDR versions. So we had to make sure our pipeline worked for both of those, and we didn't have any issues that were going to be introduced anywhere. And then from there, we could start looking at how we were going to approach the more creative element of it. Once we kind of got this locked in, we were then able to look at how we were going to distribute these LUTs between the departments. Is it locked? The way we distribute these LUTs is all of the 709 LUTs went to the camera department, and then another version went to the editorial department, and that was for their reference. And then all the look files went to VFX and to grade, and that was so we could do all of our dailies. VFX had open control over any effects they were going to do, and then obviously we weren't committed to anything within the grade. We could always rebuild the grade as and how we needed to whilst we were working. And that was a key thing. We just didn't want to be reined into anywhere moving forward. Building the LUT, this is just an example of kind of how we were approached building the LUT. We started with our reference, and then we did a contrast pass. We then did a color pass, which for that we just basically used printer lights, and I tried to keep it as simple as possible. And then we've done DSAT passes where we've just taken back anything where it's too much, and we've kept the LUT simple on purpose because it's going to be used on set. When we test this LUT, we use a color checker, and the first thing we do is see how all of those LUTs are going to interact with each of these colors, and is it what we want? And then once we've done that, we'll commit to the LUT, and then we'll stress test it and see if we've got any compression, if we're getting any banding, anything that's going to cause us issues later on down the process. For City is Ours, we basically came up with two LUTs, the Liverpool look and the Spain look, and they used that kind of across the whole series. And the Liverpool LUT was kind of a desatted, kind of more slightly contrast LUT, and then the Liverpool LUT was warmer. And that was just the looks they wanted to go for. The reason we use these LUTs is it gives the director and the DOP a chance to push their vision of what they think they want the show to look like early on. It also gives the editors something to kind of work with. They're not perfect, so you're going to have areas that are overexposed, you're going to have areas that are dark, you may have some areas where skin tones are too hot, but generally speaking, you're 50% of the way there. And what it also allows is it allows everyone to kind of start to get their head around what the show's going to look like and any kind of overall headline notes they kind of want to implement. It also gives the execs time to get used to what the show's going to look like. So when it comes to their exec review months later, you've not shocked them with a completely different change of style. You're kind of in the same world. In terms of the grade, we ended up grading a lot. If you've seen the show, we cover a whole load of different environments. So for us, is it playing? So for us, I've just picked out a few and how we approached it. So one of the environments we had was the carport, and when we first got this merge, it was pretty flat. We couldn't really control the lights during the shoot, so it was the director's brief that we would bring this all down and make this feel like an uncomfortable space. He's basically about to try and smuggle a body back into the country, so it needed to feel kind of uncomfortable and just a little bit kind of dirty, really. So we did a pass where we pushed all of the highlights into a more green tone, and then we pulled all the shadows down to kind of create that kind of contrast. And it was the whole idea here really is we just wanted to make this whole feeling before they leave the carpool feel as uncomfortable as possible. That's a perfect example of what we're doing with the highlights to just kind of make them feel unnatural. This is Michael's home life. So again, this leans into this warmer feel that we're going with, where we're just trying to make everything feel a bit more beautiful, a bit more heightened, and just a bit more work around them both. This time of day is midnight, and so they had tungsten light coming through the windows externally. So we did this green tint to try and circumvent making it feel too like daylight, and then brought it down. But again, it was a director's note that he wanted to make sure we could see the performance. It's naturally a dark environment that we're shooting in, so it was important that we could see faces, it was important the skin tones are correct, and it was important that we could see everything that was kind of going on and see their performance back and forwards. And to do that, literally, as you can see, we've just done a real simple pass. This is us just establishing time of day, and this is just a perfect example of how we do it. We're just bringing detail back in and then doing a final pass where we kind of establish it's a morning look. And this sets us up to go into Elaine's home. With Elaine's home, the first thing I was told is they are old school gangsters. They're more established, so they've built their life, they've built their money, so it needs to feel cleaner, it needs to feel more held together. So we went for a much cleaner, brighter look. So generally through the show, when you enter into their space, it does feel richer and warmer and more held together than everyone else, all the other characters' homes. And the way we did this was we did our first pass, and then we went through and did a colour pass, and then we did our final pass there was just to pull down some of those highlights and then also add a bit of grain. And the grain allowed us to kind of soften off how clean we had taken some of the highlights. This scene here, naturally, this was just a warm shop, so we had to lift it, and in lifting it, we brought out a lot of the kind of red tones in this room. So we then had to kind of try and pull this all back and start neutralizing it so we could get us into a space where we're leading from a daytime shot into what is about to become an interrogation scene. So we wanted us to go from a daytime scene into kind of a more gritty scene. Within this setting here, there was a few options in the room. So the first pass we did was a lot warmer and a lot more sat up. And as we kind of went for our second pass, it was decided in the room that this is one of the only times we really see Michael go to work. So it was important that we kind of lent into it a little bit. And the way we did that is we just pulled more of the colour out of the bricks around him, pushed some of those practical highlights you see above his head, and then brought all the contrast down. And we were allowed to kind of lose a bit of detail on his face because effectively we were leaning into this kind of more gritty kind of gangster feel. This is another example of it as a close-up. But yeah, this is a perfect example of we went one way, and then when we were in the grade, it was decided no, we would do another couple of passes to try and refine that into something we felt could go a bit further. And that happens a lot. You'll do a first pass, you think you're there, and then you'll make a big change. That final pass is the final pass we did, which pulls out some more of that warmth and adds a bit more contrast. This environment here is an environment we go back to a lot, and it changes kind of depending on time of day. But I just want to use it as an example to show how we were doing really, really light basic touches to just try and put a bit of a feel around what would naturally be just a flat white room. So here all we've done is we've put a tiny bit of tint, which is like a green tint, into the highlights and brought down some of the contrast slightly. And it's literally because it's a bridging scene to where we go next. When we started looking at flashbacks, it was decided we didn't want to enter into a flashback world. We wanted it to feel like memories. So the grade we went for lent in closer to what we were doing with the rest of the show. And then what we did is a secondary pass where we did a bit of a desat, and we cooled down all the shadows. And that just allowed us to have something that was in keeping with the show, but was enough of a departure for you to know you're not in the main body of the show. Challenges. The main challenges we faced when we were going through this was just really hot environments. There was a lot of environments we were in where just the nature of it just made the room quite hot or made the room over contrasty. And as you start lifting things and start desaturating things, you start losing elements of like texture. So the first thing we did was lift out as much of that red as possible, and then started replacing skin tones and bringing out some of the tiles in the background. We also put a bit of shape around the room so we could keep the kind of intimate feel of the sauna. Again, this scene is kind of a pivotal scene in the show where we kind of set out how things are going to move forward. So again, that's just another example of a bit of light on his face, a skin tone pass, and bringing things back. With the restaurant, we come back here loads throughout the series. So we had to come up with a plan that we could keep consistent. We couldn't do anything too crazy that we wouldn't be able to replicate. So we decided what we would do is we'd pull back all of the kind of red from the highlights, and then we would do a pass where we start to bring out all these tones within all the fabrics that give us that kind of blue background and pull some contrast down. Then we just focused in on them. It is really key that if you know you're going to go back somewhere a lot, that you have a strategy for how you're going to address that, because you don't want it to be inconsistent, basically. You don't want to have to go back there in episode 2 or 3 or 4 and then find that you can't do what you've just done. This is another example of it on a close-up. It's a better example. So this is how it would look like in 709. This is our pass as we pull back some of that colour, and then we go back through. This is us putting some of those tones back into the fabric, a skin tone pass. Then there's a highlight pass in the window, neutralising those windows back so we can get daylight, and there's a bit of shape on the table to push that focus back onto them. And these are all just simple passes we're generally doing, and we just keep it all simple because we've got to replicate it a lot. So once you've got these tools and you've got them saved, you can pull on them whenever you need to. The reverse of this shot is another example of having two shots that are not really set up in the same way. So the background of this shot was a lot warmer. So what we did is we created a secondary pass, which was basically a push towards a green tone. And that allowed us to kind of neutralise the windows a bit neater, and also make that kind of balance work between the two shots. And again, when you're balancing out these things, that's kind of the kind of things you're doing. It's not necessarily a copy and paste all the time. This is just an example of what happens when you start desatting stuff. So here we've pulled the desat out, we've lost a bit of that colour in our face. So we've had to bring that back once we've started bringing all those warm tones. From here, you can start doing beauty work or any other refinement work you want to do, but you need to get those palettes clean and correct before you start adding other effects, and otherwise you're going to find you kind of lose where you are and you can't replicate that easily. Again, these are just keeping things simple. This section here, this is more of a kind of example of, it's not the prettiest set of shots, but this is a perfect example where we've had to make sacrifices. the sun was in and out constantly, and we were shooting a lot within this van. So we had to sacrifice things like the windscreens a little bit so we could keep light on their face. And it was a conversation in the room with the directors where we said, how do you want to go with this? And they said, look, I want to see performance over style on this. So pushing in a big look wasn't the priority. The priority was making sure we got the time of day consistent and that we could see all the performance as it goes on. Again, this is a heightened moment, but it's one where we just try to focus mainly on, can we see everything? Is there anything that's distracting us? Can we try and remove anything that's going to be a distraction? So that was kind of, with challenges, they're the kind of challenges we kind of faced, really. Past challenges, once we've kind of finished our grade, the main thing we then have to do is we have to do our final polish, and that happens after we do our exec review. So once we've completed the exec review and we've got the exec notes in and we're happy with the grades and everyone's done, we'll then send that HDR master off to online. They'll do their online pass and feed us back HDR online master. We then have to do an SDR trim of that to make the 709 versions that need to be deliverable. So for us, our 709 versions were going to BBC. The approach we took when we were going for the 709 version, which is the SDR version, was we weren't trying to create a new grade, and we weren't trying to copy it like for like. We were just trying to keep creative intent. Anyone who's tried HDR will know that you're never going to get highlights the same, you're never going to get shadows the same, colors move around slightly. So we had the HDR reference on one screen, and we graded on our master screen, and we just tried to focus on creative intent. When we hit scenes like that interrogation scene, does it still feel the same? Are we getting the same thing? Are we losing anything? When we're looking at skies, have we got the same information? If we haven't, can we rebuild that sky so we can maintain that information? That's the kind of stuff we were doing. We weren't trying to create a new grade. It's more of a kind of refinement pass to make sure we can get that SDR in line. And then kind of the next thing we kind of go into is like collaboration. For us, we had we had one DOP, but 3 directors. Each of those directors are established, so they've all got their looks and feels and their opinions, and they've spent months shooting and editing these episodes. So we needed to make sure they had space and time to play around, but we also needed to put some things in place that would mean we had some ground rules. So things like how we approach the restaurant, how we approach Elaine's house, how we approach some of the kind of heightened scenes. All of those things were kind of baked in early doors and communicated back to the whole team. So when it came to their episodes, they kind of had a gauge of how we've been addressing those environments and those sections. Another thing we did is we used Frame.io, where as soon as we'd done our Conform Master, which is basically getting it back to high res and getting it ready for the grade, as soon as we're at that stage, we sent those out to all the directors, and we allowed the directors then a few days, and the DOP and the producers, to put together all of their notes. They didn't have to be organised, they just had to put all their notes together, and that meant that for my first day of grade, I could just sift through those notes and just craft together a first pass on the day and get it in shape. And then when they came in on the second day, they were straight into refinement. So it was an efficient use of our time and an efficient use of their time. And it also gave them time to kind of have thoughts and play around. That's basically the key thing around collaboration, really, just making sure everyone's got time and making sure you've put things in place to kind of keep everything on track. The next thing really for us is just key takeaways, so things that from this show that were really useful. And I guess the 3 things that were really useful that we kind of learned was that preparation was just key for us. We had a lot of time on this to prep, and it meant we could play around and we could test things, we could test lenses, test cameras, test LUTs. So by the time we got to shooting, we knew we had everything locked in. And then working tidy. It's a busy show, and there's a lot of episodes. It's a big team. Making sure our naming conventions were tight, making sure our projects were tidy. We knew all of our points of call and communication, all that stuff. That organisation just takes so much stress out of your day once you've got that ironed out. And the other is just time management. I had 3 days per ep, And you could go into it saying, I've got 3 days, I'll just do whatever in those 3 days. But planning out those 3 days and going, okay, my first day is going to be me, I'm going to do a big day here, get everything in shape. The second day is refinement. And then on the third day, we're going to do, having a plan and leaving some contingency in there is really, really important. Yeah, that's kind of my key takeaways. I think there is some questions I've just been told. So I'm just going to check these. I've got no question. One sec, sorry. What do I think of Final Cut for colour? I think if you're going to use Final Cut, for the same amount of effort you're going to put into trying to colour correct something in Final Cut, it'd be worthwhile kicking out an XML and bringing it into Resolve. You can get Resolve for free and it'll give you probably better controls over things. Final Cut is good, but it depends on how far you're trying to push that grade. If it's something you need to turn around quickly, then do it in Final Cut. But if it's something you want to build out more, just kick an XML out, bring it into Resolve and do it in Resolve. That would be my opinion. I don't really have any more questions, I think. I think I'm pretty good.